one of the things that I have seen is that Black boys are being pushed into special education programs because of behavior. And behavior is impacted by discipline. Discipline comes from the school. This comes from policies that are normally biased because research has shown that a lot of school district behavior and discipline policies are based off of research and studies of how Black boys act and perform in school. And so it's almost as if, well, we're creating a policy because we're making the assumption that you're going to do something wrong.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and in this episode, I talk with Jason Allen, an Atlanta-based teacher, blogger, and community advocate with a passionate drive to improve education for Black boys, as well as for increasing the number of Black male educators in schools. One of my goals for the podcast recently is to feature more perspectives and voices of the teachers who are in the trenches, working with our differently wired kids every day. I'm also aware that across the country, students of color are underserved and under-evaluated for gifted and accelerated programs, while Black boys especially tend to be over-identified with learning disabilities. I believe so deeply that all differently wired kids should be able to thrive and feel supported. So when I came across Jason's writing online, I knew right away I wanted to bring him onto the podcast to talk about this issue and to share his perspective as an educator. In our conversation, Jason tells us about his experiences as a teacher and administrator over the past 15 years, how his own learning differences influence his teaching and approach to his students, as well as his insights for improving educational outcomes for differently wired kids of color and Black boys in particular. This is a profoundly important topic within the differently wired community and deserves attention and understanding. I hope you get a lot out of this conversation. And a few quick announcements before I get to that. If you haven't seen it yet, I invite you to check out the newest section of Tilt Parenting's website, Tilt Education. On Tilt Education, you'll find the largest and still growing listing of schools for neurodivergent learners available, featuring personal testimonials from parents who have firsthand knowledge of the schools to better help parents trying to find a fit for their child with their decision-making process. You'll also find a discussion guide for differently wired for use with PTAs and reading groups, a playlist of education-related episodes, and also a section just for educators. And now, here is my conversation with Jason. Hello, Jason. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really glad to have your voice in this conversation. When I reached out to you, I think I mentioned that though this podcast is primarily for parents, I have a goal of doing more conversations that can be shared with educators as well and just talking about the education system. And I wanted to get your perspective because I found you online and some of your blog posts, which were really powerful. And so I just thank you for coming on to the show.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for your words. And I look forward to sharing some of the best practices that I use in my classroom and also being a former family engagement specialist, things that I do to also engage my parents in the learning process.
Well, as a way to get into this, I always ask people to, as a way of sharing who they are in the world, to also talk a little bit about their personal why for doing the work that they do. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why and how you got into this work?
Okay, awesome. Well, my name is Jason Allen again. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I attended public schools here, had amazing teachers. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and educators. My mom actually just retired from being a teacher. And my father is an entrepreneur. And so I'm very, familiar with the education field and, the impact that teachers have. That wasn't my dream. My dream was to actually be a lawyer, which, one day I think I may actually go and do that. But I actually just fell in love with teaching. And, I believe that it's my calling because I'm, really, honored and talented at doing it at the same time. So that's just me. I'm a writer also, so anyone who may be interested in following me can check me out at atlanta.org, and also my personal blog, which is professorjballen.blogspot.com.
Oh, thank you for that. I will include links to that in the show notes for listeners to check out your writing. So, and I was reading your bio, and you're in the classroom now, but you were working as an administrator as well before this. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I have been a assistant principal in a charter school here in Metro Atlanta, and also a district administrator with federal programs in Atlanta Public Schools.
So, and I love that you come from a family of educators. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about was, I know that for kids of color, the challenges for being differently wired are amplified. And, you know, there's been a lot, I'm living in New York City. There's a lot of conversation right now about equity in the gifted program, and that so many kids are not being identified. And I know that is not just in New York City, that happens everywhere. And I know that kids of color are also treated differently in many schools, especially Black boys, which I know is your area of passion. So as a way to get into this conversation, could you share with us some of the biggest challenges that you see in your experience that Black students in traditional school settings face? You know, we can talk about Black students in general, but also differently wired Black students.
So I can tell you that it's definitely a struggle. I think there are several dynamics that are happening. One, it starts at home. Parents are doing the best that they can, but they don't have all of the information they need to make a better decision, because there's not a clear pathway of communication from the school to home. That's a roadblock for a lot of families who have Black and brown children in public schools. The other dynamic is having a child that has special needs, whether they're gifted and talented or whether they have a learning disability that isn't being met properly in their school setting. It's a struggle for both. I have seen gifted students that were tested in elementary school and they have great test scores. They've shown their abilities, but they weren't taught properly. So when they get to middle school and they come to us as being gifted and talented, we're giving them the rigor and the work to build an airplane or, you know, write a speech to the president and be able to articulate what you need and what you want and what you see for your education in your community. And they're not able to do it. And so when we work with them and we start to uncover that there are foundational skills that haven't been placed, this is a gifted and talented student, a student that should be soaring, you know, high above the standards that are set by the school and the state. And that's not happening. So you can imagine what's happening with the children who have learning disabilities. They are coming to us in middle school and they're literally on a first and second grade reading level. And so that's just one of the many things that the children with learning disabilities are facing. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to have more conversations that are happening right now.
Yeah, I always say that there's so much work to be done. And then I get so inspired when I, you know, through doing this work and this podcast, I get to meet so many people who are doing the work, which gives me so much hope. But it can be overwhelming. It can be very daunting.
Yes, it can be overwhelming at times. I know great school leaders and, you know, schools such as Ivy Prep, where I have seen them develop an amazing special education department with the assistance, of their board, and also other specialists, such as an educational company called Lead Right, that has helped them develop this vision for how they will successfully educate girls that have learning disabilities, and it's working. The current school that I'm at, Seven Pillars Career Academy, we are making strides with our scholars that have learning disabilities. And that is myself, our leadership team, and our other teachers. And so one of the things that I've seen with my students is that they didn't have the right goals for them to overcome some of the challenges that they have with learning. Some of them were not really evaluated properly. So they have some challenges that are happening with the way that they learn and we are servicing them for something else. And so, you have a lot of those things that are happening. And then you have a child that's frustrated because they feel like they can't learn. And it's not that they can't learn. We just aren't teaching them in the manner where they can successfully produce the standards that are being presented to them.
So it sounds like you have strategies that you're able to get these students kind of back on track and meet their needs. Can you share with us some of the approaches that you've used successfully to help these kids feel confident and engaged and learning in a way that can really support their own style?
Yes, it is things that should be very familiar with, some of us. And I do things that are very old school. I try to merge old school and new school. So one of the things that I definitely do is reinforce homework. Learning has to continue at home. One of the things that I teach my students and I reinforce with the parents that I work with is that learning takes place at all times. And so one of the things that we do to change the narrative about children's fear of school or fear of not learning as fast as others is to show that we learn in different places. And so that's important because when we do research on why children don't show success or growth in the classroom, we look at the whys. And so one of the whys is children, especially children who have autism, for example, if they don't feel comfortable in the learning environment, they're not going to interact with the teacher or their peers. So they're not going to do anything. And so you want to make sure that you engage that student, but it has to be the right climate and the right atmosphere. And so knowing what the need of the student is very important. And so changing the narrative and changing the dynamic of what the classroom looks like and what learning looks like is important for a student like that because they need to see that they can learn at home. They can learn while they're driving in the car with their parent or on the bus or on a field trip or on vacation at their grandparents' house. Learning can take place in different environments. And so for a child who has autism, seeing that repetition and seeing that, okay, I can learn in multiple places, that is what breaks down that barrier from them being able to engage with their teacher and other people.
Yeah, so it's really a mindset shift. And I love that idea of being a lifelong learner too. And yeah, that's really interesting that I haven't heard that as an approach that other teachers I've talked to have used. And it makes so much sense.
Yeah. So another thing that I do with my students and my parents, I break down how we're going to do homework. So homework connects to what we do in class. Of course, most teachers are doing this. There are some teachers who aren't doing homework, and that's okay too. But I believe that homework, is important, especially for students who have learning challenges because it helps them, build up their skills. And so, in my current school, we do BrainPOP, which is a familiar website with students and parents, and we do our bell ringer or our opening with BrainPOP. And so, as we close out our lessons, we do our exit, closing activity, as a follow-up with BrainPOP. And then on various days or selected days, they have an activity at home that they do on BrainPOP. Student is familiar with it. Parents are familiar with it. Students are able to share with their parents what they're doing. There are engaging activities which continue learning at home, and students are wanting to do it. One of the interesting things is I don't have a problem with getting homework back or homework done from my students. And that's something that's very rare because I can tell you right now, I know a lot of teachers and they're like, my students are not doing homework. They are not doing it at all. And so, that's one of the things that I celebrate in our staff meetings and also with our parents is that, we have a 99% or 100%, turn-in rate of homework. And that's something that you don't traditionally see or hear about. So homework does work, and that's a strategy that I use to help my students improve in their goals. Another strategy, again, as I just mentioned, goals, is goal setting. I'm teaching them foundational basic life skills. And so, reading strategies come with that, teaching them how they can overcome their speech impediment by practicing at home in the mirror. So, we do different skits and then they go home and they practice that. And so practice makes perfect. That's a philosophy that I teach my students for them to be really engaged and improving how they learn. Engagement is the key to everything. That's another strategy. So a lot of these things that I'm speaking of are different ways that I'm engaging my students in their learning. And that has worked for them. I have had, out of all of my caseload, every one of my students has made gains in some area for their goals, whether it's math, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, or whether it's grammar. And so it's very important. And actually, I have students who take speech. So speaking is also a goal. So teaching them public speaking and getting them comfortable with speaking in front of their peers and in large settings is important. And so how do you get a child that has a speech impediment to feel comfortable with asking a question?
So it sounds like you've really created a culture around learning and curiosity and engagement in your classroom, and your kids are really taking your lead, and it makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you're probably an amazing teacher, and your kids, I can imagine they want to show up for you. And so I'm wondering, there are so many different school models, and traditional schools I know are the ones where differently wired kids tend to suffer the most. And I'm wondering, where do you see the barriers in terms of some of these strategies being implemented in a traditional school model?
Well, here's what we do at my school. One of the things that makes us unique is that we're a non-suspension school. And so my students are, coming from all different types of placements. They're used to being in in-school suspension. They're used to being suspended from school, suspended from the bus. That has not happened for them this entire year. So, students that I have that have behavior plans, they've met their goals. They met their goals months ago. And, that's a huge improvement because the culture changed for them. And so when you mentioned that earlier, culture is a big part of how schools can really reach their students. Our public schools, they struggle with that. One reason why is because school districts do not invest in family engagement programs and services. They don't invest in student services departments. And so that means that the counselors, your social emotional learning teachers, your graduation coaches, your parent liaison or family coordinators, your special education teachers, your paraprofessionals, all of those persons have to be actively engaged and supported in the schools. And I've worked in a public school. I've been a district administrator for a public school district. And I can tell you that, public schools across the United States, they struggle with funding and supporting those departments. And so that's why, a lot of children with learning disabilities, even children in the general education setting, are struggling because schools aren't really being supported as we believe that they are.
Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. I'm wondering, as you're talking about this, I'm wondering if politics is in your future. I mean, it seems like, and people have brought this up to me too, there's a lot of policy change that needs to happen as well. And I'm like, that is not my wheelhouse, but I'm wondering, is that something you think about doing?
I have colleagues and friends who are elected officials, and I'm never a person to say never. I will say that I have been actively engaged in student government since I was in elementary school to college. So public office could be a possibility.
Okay. So this isn't on the record, people, so no promises. But no, I just had to ask because, again, we talk about the enormity of the challenges that these kids face. And there are just some systemic policy challenges that, as you said, just that funding piece is huge. And I think it is something that so many parents aren't aware of, right? They think they pay their money or the PTA and, they just kind of assume it's all a finely oiled machine, perhaps. And that's not necessarily the case.
That's correct.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the kids that come to you. You talked about in other school settings that these are kids who often they didn't have the right evaluations done. They weren't being taught with the right goals in mind. What do you see is going on in terms of these kids, maybe when they're in elementary school, that is preventing them from being identified and supported the right way? I mean, you talk a lot about family engagement, and I think that is a really important piece of this. But what other challenges, especially our differently wired kids of color when they're young and they're in preschool or early elementary, is preventing them from getting the support that they need?
Okay, so several things that I would like to touch on is going to bring up to highlight. One of the things that I have seen is that Black boys are being pushed into special education programs because of behavior. And behavior is impacted by discipline. Discipline comes from the school. This comes from policies that are normally biased because research has shown that a lot of school district behavior and discipline policies are based off of research and studies of how Black boys act and perform in school. And so it's almost as if, well, we're creating a policy because we're making the assumption that you're going to do something wrong. So here's what we're going to do if you show a sign of this. So I have Black boys that have been pushed into special education for behavior improvement plans. And it was because they didn't want to sit down. They wanted to stand up to learn, or they needed to get up, every 5 minutes for a break because their minds race so fast. It's like, okay, I have all these ideas, but I have so much energy. So they need to be up. They need to be engaged. I read notes that, he's being evaluated for this because he won't pay attention to the teacher in class. But the teacher's style of teaching is that they lecture the whole time. So they're just talking the entire time. There are no visuals, there's no break, there's no group work. And so that type of setting didn't work for the child. And so that is one of the major issues, is that schools don't know how to handle the behavior of Black boys. And so they're willing to push them into special education. That way they're not disrupting the classroom and other students aren't being disrupted. But their education is disrupted because they're just being placed somewhere that may not be servicing them.
Right. So what is I'm always trying to think of how can we as a community create change, be part of shifting this paradigm. Where do you see the heavy lifting being done here? Is it in education of the teachers? Is it of education of the parent community in general?
So 3 things. It can start with advocacy for better policies in special education, and also, including the gifted and talented area. They like to distinguish the two. Secondly, it starts with also how we engage families. Families need to be a part of the process in regards to how goals are implemented, what it looks like, how they can support it at home. I know that most parents, they told me this year, they were like, I've never really been engaged in the process like this. And I'm looking at them like, what are you talking about? And they're like, we normally have the meeting at the beginning of the year and that's it. And I'm like, well, that's not how I do things. And so, engaging the parents in the goals and the work and ways that they can help their child overcome their disability, that's where the major work starts. The other thing is we need to improve the co-teaching models in public classrooms. A lot of teachers are being, I don't want to say forced, but their passion isn't to co-teach or have another teacher in their classroom working with them. And so when that dynamic is not, congealed and in place, it impacts how the children learn. So schools need people who could come in and train their teachers on what it should look like. And also ensuring that the general ed teachers are aware of how different strategies and accommodations can help not just the children that have a learning disability, but also the general ed children as well. And so being able to bring together and merge those best practices is important. And that comes with having a good team that can provide professional development that's ongoing for teachers so that they are learning as well as the students.
So are you seeing, you've been in education for 15 years, and I'm just wondering, are you seeing change in doing this work as being an advocate and working in administration and being so involved in these issues? And this is what you write about. Often you've got a lot of great blog posts and articles where you're sharing these perspectives. Are you seeing things improving?
Things are improving in some places, but in a lot of places, it's not. It's really a lot of the same thing. I'm really disappointed in where the field of education currently stands. We are in a major crisis with a huge deficit in teachers across the nation. I'm so aloof as to why it's not on CNN on a daily basis in regards to the number of teachers that are leaving the profession. It's concerning. And it's not even teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, nurses, counselors. It's like we don't have people that are showing up for our children because they're either being underpaid, overworked, or not being able to grow in their field. And so it's really challenging in education. It's very political. You have a lot of things that happen in communities with gentrification and affordable housing and transportation. And so, that impacts education. When you don't have the staffing that you need in your school, that impacts education. So there are so many dynamics that are happening where it doesn't make any sense. I was telling my students this on yesterday that my great grandparents lived well into their 90s, and my oldest great grandfather lived to be 107. And I told my students that I have letters and cards from my grandparents. And I told them, I said, I'm not saying this to, you know, belittle you all. Then they know what that words mean because I taught them. And I told them, I said, I'm going to show you guys their letters because I want you all to see how they were writing with a third grade education. They didn't finish school after third grade. And the things that you guys are struggling with are foundational things that my great grandparents could do, and they didn't go past third grade. And they were so puzzled by that. They were like, well, why did that happen? I said, well, we have to look at the beginning. These were your challenges with learning, and you all are telling me that you didn't even know that until I asked you in our first interview. I interview my students. So at the beginning of the year, every student gets an interview with me. So they get to learn who I am as a teacher, and I get to learn who they are. And so when I asked them about their deficiencies, my students that had speech impediments, they had never even heard of that. They didn't even know that that's what that meant. They just knew that they stuttered and something was wrong with them. And they didn't get that from home. They got that from a teacher.
Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, and I've heard this from other guests I've had on the show, that within the Black community as well, that there is more stigma attached to certain disabilities, or the idea of getting support might be looked down upon or frowned upon working with a therapist. Has that been your experience with the kids that you're working with?
You know, this is what I believe. School districts have to have something going on with the medical field because all of these children, whether they're black, red, yellow, black, white, are being diagnosed with ADHD. You know, I'm not saying that it's not real, But when I look at what's being told and shown to me on paper, I look at these students and I'm like, I've seen this. And then I go back to my own experience and I'm like, well, we were doing that in school and they never told us that this is what it was, but this is what my teacher did and it worked. And so I think that, it's several dynamics that are going on. A lot of children are being placed on medicine, and it's for things that can be managed. And when I say managed, is parents and teachers have to understand that every child is not the same. My teachers were learning that as they were teaching, our generation in the 90s, like, this isn't working. We're going to have to start integrating technology. We're going to have to start doing more engaging things. I can't just get up here and talk for a whole hour and say, write down everything I say and expect every child to do it, because we realized that we were failing children and we were leaving children behind. So we had to change our practices and our awareness to meet every child. And unfortunately, that's not happening everywhere. So Black children, especially Black boys, are being left behind in special education programs because their needs are simply not being met.
Yeah, I mean, with differently wired kids, it really is about getting to know who they are, right? Becoming fluent in them, in the way that they're thinking, in the way they process information. And I feel like most students don't thrive in a traditional classroom. And those that do, it's because they're, for whatever reason, able to just get through that day, that construct. But it's not what would really make them thrive. I think the whole system needs to be overhauled so kids can really just learn in a creative way.
And that is exactly what you said. Kids have to learn in a creative way. And I think what makes my teaching style unique is because of my learning style. I share with my students, and I started doing that when I was an assistant principal, because a lot of the students that were being sent to my office had learning disabilities. And so I started sharing with my students that, when I was at school, I was gifted and talented, but I also had special services. I also told them that I had a speech impediment. And, they now understand what that means. So they're like, oh my God, Mr. Allen, you used to stutter. And I was like, oh, you would not even believe it. And I was like, but, when they hear me talking and they're watching me as I teach, you would never think that was one of the challenges that I had. So I'm telling you what I know because it worked. And then I tell them stories of former students that had challenges with reading and comprehension and being able to write. And I'm like, this is one of my students' story on the blog. And they read it and they're like, oh my God, they had this challenge that I have and they wrote this. And I was like, yeah. So that it's also a connection. Teachers have to be able to have a connection with their students, but you also have to be understanding and you have to be willing to change your perspective on what you believe is the best thing for the child. And I'm saying that in this perspective, that what I have learned is that my students, based off of what they are able to produce and what they show me and teach me what I should be doing to help them overcome their deficiency. So we have to be more engaged with our students and looking inside of what's happening to determine what we can do to help them overcome their challenges, and not teach to them. We have to teach with them. We have to learn from them, and they have to also learn from us.
I love that so much. Yeah. Again, it really is about seeing the child and being vulnerable with them as well. So I wanted to, just as a way to close this out, in talking about the teaching profession, and I appreciate your thoughts on, just the profession as a whole and how overworked and undervalued and underpaid and stressed out our teachers are. And within my community, many parents are challenged by the school system. It's kind of the biggest pain point for them, is their child is not thriving in a school system. And so I'm trying to, again, help bridge that gap in some ways and just get some conversations going. So I'm just curious if you could give one change or one kind of planting a seed for one thing that you think is the most urgent mindset shift or change that we want to start encouraging teachers to make. We know teachers are working and have the best of intentions for our kids. So what's one thing that we could encourage them to do to better support our differently wired kids in general and specifically differently wired kids of color?
The best thing that I could say is whether it's a special education teacher, general ed teacher, support staff, administrators, any educator that touches the life of a student, whether they have a learning disability or not, is to truly be engaged with them so that whatever you're teaching them and modeling for them and exposing them to is empowering them to be their best self, to make the best choices, to critically think about things, to actively listen, to respect the thoughts and presence of others, and to be the best representation of their community and their family. And I feel like those are basic things. Those are things that connect us as people. And so when we can connect as people, then we can make the difference. When I was an administrator, one of the things that I would tell my teachers and support staff is our students have to see us as human first. So Mr. Allen is able to make a difference as a teacher because they see Mr. Allen as a human. They see me concerned about what's happening in the world and what's happening in the community and what's happening in their families. You know, what's happening with them. When they see that you're a human and you actually, care about things that's happening in the news and you listen to the music and you know what's happening on TV or, what the latest movies are, that connects you as humans. And that's what makes a difference. And any of us can do that if we're willing.
What a lovely note to end on. I think connection is really everything. And there's so much research that shows how critical it is that kids have healthy connections with the adults in their lives. So I just love that you brought that up. So before we say goodbye, could you again just remind us where listeners can connect with you online and read your articles that you're working on?
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you for having me and thank you for everyone that's listening. I hope I've said something that is a positive takeaway for you. For ways to keep up with me, my personal blog, which is called I Am a Black Male Educator, is professorjballen.blogspot.com. And I also am honored and proud to work for the Education Post through Atlanta, which is a blog for really everyone in the state of Georgia at this point because we've grown so much. But you can check us out at edlanta.org, and that's edlanta.org. And that's where you can subscribe to both of those blogs and keep up with strategies and different ways to empower teachers and parents, strategies that work with children who have special needs, ways to engage families in the learning process, also ways that communities can partner with schools and how businesses can partner with schools, and a variety of different stories that can touch you and empower you in different ways. So please check me out.
Thank you for that. And again, listeners, I'll include links on the show notes page. And I should just point out that the Atlanta site, even though there are some Georgia-focused things, there's definitely a lot of content on there that is applicable anywhere that you live and great perspective. So definitely head over there. So Jason, thank you so much. I know we're recording this after a work day on a Thursday. So I just appreciate you making time to come by the podcast and share with us today.
No problem. Again, thank you for having me and have a great evening.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, where you can download the transcript, find links to Jason's blog, and all the other resources we discussed, visit tiltparenting.com/session194. If you get a lot out of Tilt Parenting and would like to make a small monthly contribution to help cover the production costs associated with the show, it's really easy to do. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting and sign up. You can pledge $10, $5, or even just $2 a month. Again, that's patreon.com/tiltparenting. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating or a review for Tilt Parenting on iTunes. Ratings and reviews help keep this podcast visible in an ever-growing sea of podcasts. Thank you so much for considering. And that's all for this week. For more information on Tilt Parenting, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.